Yeah. So let's the next session that we have will be taken by Arun and Viresh. So let's invite them. So Arun, he's an IT professional with huge experience across technology management, delivery management, building capabilities in service deliveries, cloud and platform engineering, and support functions. He has significant experience in management, driving change and processes, helping reduce the cost and increase efficiencies in the greenfield and a mature project. Speaking about Viresh, he brings over 19 years of leadership experience across travel, payments gateway, ERP, and network management systems. Currently associated with Amadeus, he heads one of the largest and most complex platforms, which is reservation. Apart from his main responsibilities, he leads the innovation strategy and practice at Amadeus Labs in Bangalore. As a member of leadership team, he is an active contributor in strategic planning, designing the strategy, contributing to the company-wide initiative. Arun and Viresh are currently associated with Amadeus. Today, they would be speaking on yet another interesting topic of the day, that is the art of gamifying FinOps. I think I'm looking forward to learning what these topics bring. So welcome Arun and Viresh. The floor is all yours to take. Can I ask you to share your screen?
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot for the introduction and all of this. Arun will start the screen share. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I say very good morning because I'm doing it this session from US. A little of a change in the introduction, so I moved to US to head one of the engineering groups of Amadeus. So I'll speak a bit about this. So hope all of you are doing well and all your families are doing well. I know this is the last session of the day in India, but we'll try to make it as interesting as possible, and you'll end your day with some good key takeaways from this session, right? So a little bit about us. I think most of it has already been said. We are the simple guys where we'll try to learn the things and try to share in these forums. Thanks to this platform, which enables us to connect and do this. A bit about Amadeus. So we are the top travel technology company. We enable the travel across the world. Every second travel that happens in the world, it happens to Amadeus. We are behind every second travel. Yes, I truly mean that. So we help the airlines, hotels, businesses, airports, the insurance companies to get their software and enable them to provide the services to the end users who are the travelers. We are spread across, we are around 16,000 people with 150 nationalities spread across 160 geographies, right? So we work on various technologies. We have recently partnered with Microsoft. We are embarking in our journey to the cloud transformation. That's how it makes it a bit interesting for us also to share our perspectives from our personal learnings, and as well as what is the transformation that we are going at Amadeus, right? So that's about Amadeus. Now, before we deep dive into the topic, and I hand it over to Arun, who will share his deep dive expertise in the FinOps part of it. A bit of demystifying on the cloud. I'm sure all of you know cloud because it's both in our personal and professional life. It's there everywhere. It's become like an electricity nowadays, right? Both on the personal side. So gone are the days where we are looking at buying a 10 GB of SanDisk hard drive or a pen drive. Now we all look to say that how can I store my photos and store my data on the cloud? So Gmails. So gone are the days where we want to install something to build our websites. Gone are the days where we want to install a particular software. We all want to use is it as a service. We just want to pay like how we use it. It's like an electricity, right? We don't want to pay more of it, and we want to use what is required, right? So there are different flavors when we talk about cloud. In simple words, when I spoke about Gmail, Google Drive, and all of this, that's more about software as a service. It's a platform as a service. Imagine earlier when we want to build a code or deploy or test, we need to install the softwares. We need to pay for the licensing. Now you have your Azure, you have your Google platforms, Google Cloud app engines. You just have it. You can build your code, you can deploy, and you can test it. That's about platform as a service. Infrastructure as a service. Imagine the challenge that all of the startups and freelancers used to face where to build, where to host their services, or where to host their software, right? The data center. And the large organization also, the challenge that we are all facing is to say the cost of the data center, and with the regulations that are happening across the world in terms of the data privacy. So how do we manage that? And the cost that is involved in managing the data center, the cost which is involved in managing the niche skills of the people to take into this, the cost that is involved in managing the capex and opex part of this data center. So it's all goes off with infrastructure as a service. The three cloud providers and a lot of other cloud providers, the way in which they provide, it helps us to say where we put our compute, where we put our software, how we put our software, where to use, whom we should allow them to use, who maintains this, the whole of servers and the infrastructure, right? So in summary, this is about the way in which cloud is used, right? So, you know, a lot of studies have shown, right? A lot of large organizations, the enterprises are moving into the cloud. One of the basic things, we all say we want to use the best in class of technology, best in class of features and all. But you know, there is something bottom line, right? Cost. Everyone wants to save the cost. But is it so easy to save the cost when we go to the cloud? No, you will understand a bit of it. I'm not going to complicate more of it, but you'll understand how better to use the cloud so that you enjoy being in the cloud. I have seen personally saying that, okay, we are moving on the cloud, but our hosting costs are high. We are moving on the cloud, but our hosting is in one region, our customers are in the other region. How are we trying to do this? We are on the cloud. Okay, at the end of the year, the financials doesn't match that. Okay, we have made a huge change in the cost savings, right? So there is an art and the science behind how we well manage the cloud. So that's all about FinOps. The financial operational management is called as a FinOps. It's an accountability. It's no more an accountability of a procurement team whenever the licensing part of comes in. It's an accountability of everyone in the chain, including the development, product managers, the DevOps people, how better we use the cloud, right? So now what we talk about the components of the cloud. So what are the basic things that we think about the cloud? So coming back to the analogy or the use cases that I spoke about, it's about compute, right? You need to have a software. You need to run your software in the cloud on the internet. That's about compute, right? So you have Cloud Platform or the Azure, the AWS Elastic Engines, which will provide the way in which you want to run your software. Is it so easy? Yes, it is easy. What is complicated? How much to use? What is the power that we want to use? And can we keep it so elastic, saying that it can spin off and use it? Yes, but there is a way in which you have to use it, and where to run these servers and where to run the services. Either it has to be closer to the place where the customers are using our software, or it has to be closer to the place where a lot of our engineers are working across. So do we keep it in a low cost sites of an organization, or do we keep it in the headquarters? So there is a way in which it has to be used. It's easy, but there's art in this. The second part on the storage. Where do we keep our data? Where this data has to be stored? So when we say cloud, okay, is it not the same that wherever we store on the cloud, it's the same cost? Yes or no? It's relative, but it's different. Saving something, storing something in Arizona is different than say storing something in Dubai or to India. So there is a way in which where we want to store and how we want to store, whether we want some dedicated instances or whether we want to keep it shared across everything, whether we pay on monthly basis, whether we pay it on a yearly basis. So that's about the storage. The third part is on the data or the networking. That means in some cases where we might have the hybrid cloud model, where we'll have the data transfer that is happening between our data centers onto the cloud on the other way, and how we allow users or the customers to use this data. You might have the integration with the multiple vendors. You might have integration with the multiple customers where we are exchanging the data between, right? It also depends how are you exchanging the data. So how well you send and receive the data, at what time it has to be done, right? So that's about the data and the networking. And in terms of the management, the overall management of this cloud computing, that itself is a huge focus area for a lot of the organizations to say how we train the people, when when we take a decision to move our applications or the software into the cloud, and to train the different verticals in the organization to say how well they could manage this move. Third is to sustain this move. Fourth is to better use of this entire services that our wonderful cloud providers provide. So it's about the learning, managing, sustaining, and innovating across all these features, right? So that's about the components or the various factors that we could consider to do it. On a high level, this is all about the cloud, the nitty-gritties behind this financial operations that we talk about. So now to go in detail, so I call upon Arun, who will help us to understand the architecture and the science and the art behind all of this to go in a deep dive part of it. Over to you, Arun.
Yeah, thanks, Veeresh. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, yes.
So let's. I mean, thanks for setting the context. And as Veeresh put across, on the cloud we have sort of four ways you tend to use up money, waste money, add value to your cloud, however you want to put it, right? And let's deep dive on these four components. The first component, sort of, which Veeresh mentioned, was compute, right? What does compute really mean, or what are sort of the benefits of cloud, right? So it's typically the flexibility that the cloud service provider provides on the compute side, right? So what does the flexibility mean? And pretty simple. Let's look at the airline industry. There's a holiday season coming. Typically, when you go have bookings on your airline, maybe it's 10,000 users, 20,000 users, and the holiday season kicks in, and maybe on particular days you have 10x, 20x the number of people who try to book, right? In a similar context, which probably you would relate to well, would be Hotstar, right? So you would log into Hotstar and an India-Pakistan match, and there are like 5 crore people watching. The second the match is over, there is no more 5 crore users on Hotstar. It's down to 5 users, 10 users, 10,000 users, right? So there is a lot of this flexibility which kicks in. And what does this mean? So if you have a lot of infrastructure provision way before your peak hits, right? So let's say I buy all my infrastructure, and because I buy all my infrastructure, assuming I'm going to hit 5 crore users on my platform, you're sitting idle with that platform and not consumed from an infrastructure standpoint. The same on the reverse. Let's say you underestimate your capacity or the number of users who are going to hit your system, and you say, okay, only 5,000 users are going to come to my system, but let's say 10,000 users come in. So you're basically putting 5,000 users on hold because they cannot be served because of the infrastructure. What does this mean from a cost standpoint? Is when you buy all the infrastructure and buy it on-prem, you're paying all of it, irrespective of whether you use it on day 1, day 2, day 3, only it will be used at optimum capacity when the peak hits, right? So if you're not hitting capacity, it's underutilized. And if you're overutilizing it, you have not bought enough, so you're losing customers, right? So this is a great chart for you to refer to in either of the scenarios where you're underutilizing or overutilizing, you're losing customers or losing opportunity, right? But in terms of cloud, what does this really mean? You can scale up, scale down according to your need. You can put in a little bit of a buffer saying, okay, I need to have 5% more of my infrastructure at whatever time. And when the scaling happens, you sort of either scale up or scale down, right? So that's sort of the context which flexibility gives and what components drives value on the cloud. And it's not a unknown component, but what are the things that typically you miss? When you're looking at flexibility from an art or science standpoint of it, if you have a data center mindset in cloud saying, okay, I know my Christmas, I need to have 10x more capacity. So you buy today, sit on that infrastructure, not utilize it. On the same, if you translate this to cloud and say, oh, I am going to hit Christmas, so let me bump up all my infrastructure on my cloud and wait for the peak to happen, you're going to lose money, right? So that's the typical, when you change from a CapEx model to an OpEx model, never think the data center mindset, you'll potentially lose money. Similarly, cost savings on CapEx, which is on the reverse. When you buy an infrastructure, when you sort of, let's say, take an example, your company buys infrastructure for scaling up. In 3 years, you deprecate that infrastructure. And what really happens when you deprecate, you sort of recover tax money on it. But on cloud, you don't buy any infrastructure. I mean, you pay, even if you buy reserved instances, even if you buy saying, I'm going to commit 3 years of my instances, all of it is OpEx. So which logically means you're burning money on a regular basis. Simple example, CapEx is buying the car, OpEx is putting fuel to run the car, right? And in cloud, everything's OpEx. There is nothing called CapEx because you don't buy anything. None of the infrastructure is ever yours, so which means you lose tax on a regular basis. Similarly, on flexibility, sort of flexibility on people as well. You provision old skills to new jobs. It's not going to work, so you need to invest, which goes into a little bit of the category of management, which Veeresh sort of indicated at the beginning, but there's largely flexibility on the user. And last but not the least, which sort of gets covered a little later as well, leaking capacity is you buy infrastructure, you keep it, you don't know how it's going to use because you do not have the right monitoring in place. Potentially you're going to lose OpEx, which is quite bad because you're like burning money on a month-on-month basis. It's not something that you have bought one time and then you don't know what you're going to do, right? So giving a very similar context, sort of switching onto the data part, right? What really happens? If you're Tim Cook, Steve Jobs, if you want to buy an iPhone, I don't think Apple would charge you to buy the iPhone, right? So anything that's your own, you don't really pay, right? In a similar context, what happens on a data center? If you have a data center, if there is data transferring between one server to the other, you don't really pay for that data within your own data center, right? Maybe you pay from a point of view of small electricity charge because you're running both PCs, but it's not really something big. But what happens on cloud? Anything, if you have two servers, ingress data, anything that is flowing from one server to the other into my server, you don't pay. But if there is a data transfer from my, I mean, when I say server, could be VM, could be any of these application load balancer, classic load balancer, any of those, you pay outgoing fees. And if you see, this is a little dated chart on AWS, it gives you a view of what AWS charges for any kind of data transfer, right? This keeps changing. I mean, it's a little old data. AWS also says in some of them, they have made it free, but largely you pay this data. And this is very important for you to know because in any kind of calculation you do, it's very hard to estimate how much money you're going to lose because of data transfer happening between your own two servers, but transferring outward, you're paying for it. So the third, which is sort of, we've covered data, we've covered flexibility, which is compute. A little bit of a, I would say, management, non-management area is security. This is very important because security is an area which we always believe cloud. Some people say cloud is not secure enough, but some people say cloud is extremely secure. Yes, cloud does provide, I mean, cloud service provider gives you great security features, but they are basic. Especially when you go to the next level of security on cloud. Let's say if you have a small level of DDoS attack, which can be prevented by AWS, but if you take an advanced version of it, you pay significantly higher. And these are components which are typically ignored. When you estimate cost spend, you would probably estimate it for the basics of security, but not for the extreme edge. So what really is meant by security, right? Especially when you're on the cloud. This is something that I mentioned. If you look at state of cloud report, one of the parameters that the team speaks about is most of the security attack happens because of internal people, right? I mean, I'm not saying people internal are misusing it, but they are ignorant of potential factors. And in most, let's say, 40% of cases, the security breach happens because of the own IT stack, which likely could be because somebody had a root access, they committed the root access key onto GitHub and somebody else got access, or you did not provision the right security measure. And this costs extremely heavily on an external cloud. Some of this could be prevented on-prem. I mean, yes, if you push your root access on-prem code also, you would probably lose, but then it's restricted in a lot of ways. One tunnel entry into a cloud service could mean you have access to a lot more. Right? So what are the different costs associated with it? One, obviously, the bit that you really need to think about from a cost standpoint is skill. Skills on cloud for security is extremely expensive. So if you want one skill to learn, one skill to make a lot of money on, cloud security is one, right? So, but obviously for an organization, we need to prepare for it. Outsourcing monitoring control. is also sort of relying on the last bit, which I say relying too much on the cloud service provider, which I touched upon, is extremely important because you can't say the cloud service provider is going to manage all my cloud service, cloud security. So you need to put your security measures, which means as a value to the product that you're putting on cloud, you might have to spend a little more. Some of the other aspects is no focus on hardening. I mean, if you look at your own IT infrastructure, before you get a server, VM, whatever, the way it's hardened, the way so much of security is put in place before they hand that over is very different on cloud. You click on a button and books, you have a VM in like seconds, right? So how do you secure some of this? There are ways you could put a lot of policies, you could put a lot of security measures, but all of them come at a cost. When you do your initial cloud application framework or the web architecture or the cloud architecture design for migration to cloud, you would potentially miss some of this. And all of this is needed for your eventual view or dashboard that I'm going to speak about. The last but not the least is capacity, right? I mean, we are about 10 minutes more into the have time, so let me rush through this. The fourth component was capacity. Capacity is basically anything on the cloud seems unlimited. The more you use, you would pay more for it. I mean, on a data center, you know, I have 10 VMs, 10 servers, or 10 mainframes, however you want to say, you can only use so much. And if you want to buy something more, you will have to go through a long process of a purchase order and do it. But obviously on cloud, it's unlimited. If you don't have the right housekeeping measures, you're potentially going to lose money. And what does housekeeping means is if you need only 1 TB of storage, you have asked for 10 TB of storage, you're sort of losing 9 TB of capacity. It could be multiple AZs. You sort of put high risk, saying, oh, I'm on the cloud, let's de-risk it. Now I can put it on 10 AZs and not just one location zone. I'll be closer to the customer. So you're spending 10x the money, which you should ideally not be spending, right? And obviously, in terms of storage, you could choose a cold storage versus a hot storage. Cold storage is typically cheaper. All this said and done, we covered 4 major areas a little bit into depth. But going back to the topic, what does gamification, what does all of these mean, right? This is very theoretical. If you go explain it to a developer, obviously they'll go crazy saying, oh, I know all of this, or I don't know all of this. One step higher, if you go to a director and say, look, your team is spending so much, they'll say, oh, I don't know, maybe they're using it the right way. My team is very intelligent. You'll get all kinds of reasons where you cannot control cloud costs. So what do? You look at various ways to gamify it, make it interesting, have right dashboards, right? The same example which I gave, if you look at cloud, this is again state of cloud report. If you see on cloud, 30% of capacity is wasted, right? This is typical analyzed data. This is self-claimed. So if you talk to an organization, they'll say, oh, I'm probably wasting about 30% of capacity. But if you drill deep, there are various tools and services which provide it. There are another 15% you waste, right? 45%. So half the money on cloud is typically wasted. And good thing about it, as an organization, if you see the right side of the chart, majority of the organizations are looking at spending majority of their money to optimize cloud costs, right? Which means you need to have the right financial approach or dashboard or gamification around, right? So 4 steps on the gamification. 1, you need to have real good visibility and alerts, which means if you have the right dashboards, you will be able to generate views, forms on the financial side to be able to tell people how you're consuming any cloud service. Show back, charge back, shame back, very good views. It's sort of extending on visibility. You're able to split data at a team level, director level, operation level, and tell this is how your money is being spent. You could tell them this is how your money is being spent and ask them the money to pay so that they're able to relate it to their bottom line or top line. Or the third part is shame back, which basically say, as team 1, you're doing worse than team 2. So you're sort of putting a relative measure to it. Governance, tagging, and policies, very, very important, because if you are not able to identify your infrastructure on cloud, you will not be able to visualize the data. Last but not the least is the gamification of it, which I sort of will give a quick view on how you can do it. On-prem versus cloud, another chart for you to refer is on-prem. There are various ways you're losing money, but on cloud, there are typically 2, which I meant subscription fees, which is clear-cut OpEx, and implementation cost is sort of the management area, right? So which is not visibly seen, but you're spending. But how do we sort of split this or gamify it? very clearly you can split the view by product. You say product A is spending so much, product B is spending so much. You can split it by director or teams, saying, okay, as a director, you're spending so much of money. You can split it by cloud service provider to say, okay, as Oracle infrastructure across Azure, AWS, and GCP, you're spending so much of money. Depending on how you want to split, slice, dice, these are various tools available to do it. Giving a gamification view for the organizers. Do I have 4 more minutes?
Yeah, we do have.
Okay. So I'll rush through. So on the gamifying dashboard, you could have a view, which is what the whole topic was speaking about, is to have a view to compare people, teams, etc. To have a dashboard, there could be various levels. You could have an executive dashboard to say how, as an organization, you're spending money, how, as a team level, you're spending money. Compare each of teams. So you could give a rough example saying across September, October, and November, you're spending 16% more. Which team is spending the most, which team has spent a lot of effort and energy to reduce costs, right? I mean, here, let's take an example of Service Lab. It's helped optimize their operations. Their cost across 2 months is minus 81%, right? Absolute spend, somebody was spending $100 last month, now they're spending $10. So the relative spend down in terms of absolute value of dollar or a euro, they are spending less. And you could create dashboards in terms of top spenders. This is sort of the shame back model that I said. Why is this team the top spender, right? So then the director has a real-time view of not misusing it as they progress. So this kind of a real-time view could be made available to executives, could be made available to developers, could be made available at the entry of your NOC, wherever you want to put, so that you are able to track all your spends and expenses. So let's sort of wind up by saying what are the key takeaways. What are your FinOps solutions? Obviously, you have a gamification dashboard. You need to look at decentralizing and centralizing operations, which means there should be a central team which controls, governs practices, puts tagging mechanisms, standardization, etc. But decentralize it, which means every engineering team, testing, developers, whoever you want to call it, needs to build in this practice at the beginning of the development cycle. Like how we talk in testing of shift left, financial or FinOps also needs to be shift left, right? So shifted left. So you need to have a common vocabulary, which means everybody in the organization should know what a cloud spend is, how are they spending, what do you mean by various aspects of spend, etc. Because this is not generic across an organization. FinOps itself is not terminology. Some companies call it cloudonomics, some companies call it FinOps, some companies just say it's the financial matters of cloud. So all of this is very important. You need to have good reporting, good dashboard. You need to have good analytical skills wherein your dashboard should be reactive, like one of the dashboards that I showed. You should have reactive or proactive dashboard saying, okay, you know some team is going to go crazy on their budget. Can you automatically switch or stop their server so that they don't start exploding on their cloud costs, right? So some of those are very important in terms of how you could build the solution. And the last but not the least, just to wind up, some of the actions you can take is on FinOps, make sure you work with the cloud service provider, work on discounts, make sure you pay them early because you have upfront payment options which will help you cut costs. You need to have good dashboards, reporting infrastructure, cut down on costs. Do not behave like a data center on cloud. So be aware of all the zombie infrastructure, cut down all the size. Right sizing is very important, which means you scale up and scale down as required. Don't scale up to the peak even before you hit it. And last, very, very important is define budgets. Even if you create a cloud account, the first thing you should do is to define budget, have a dashboard in place, make sure you set the upper limit on your spend, and then run whatever infrastructure you want to run on the cloud, right? So that's sort of giving you overall view of how you can spend. Yes, 20 minutes is a little short on expressing a lot of this financial data. But if you want to reach out to us, happy to share any further information. Veeresh and I are available on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out. Hopefully you can take some data out of it and implement in your organization. And thank you. Happy to take any questions. It's very late in the night in India and probably some parts of Asia as well. So thanks for staying on. pleasure to speak to you in this conference.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. I think this was a wonderful topic in terms of like the people and organization who are more of a clientele and handling clients directly. I think it works for both. I think it will provide recommendation as well for both the organization as well as clientele as well. So I think it was a wonderful session in a way that what things should be considered when you are actually looking at the cloud, architecture and all sort of things. So yeah, thanks a lot for that session. I think from the chat box, I cannot see any question, but there is one question that I have in mind, which I'm not sure whether will be relevant or not. But let's just say if we are speaking about Black Fridays, I think that is the peak hour or peak day that is around the globe. There is a lot of shopping. So for an example, we have a website that's an Amazon. So we have an architecture setup. We have cloud, everything is hosted on a cloud. We have a decent RAM and all sort of thing. So from a scalability perspective during those things, what do you prefer? Should we focus on load balancer or should we take a look at, expanding the storage and or expanding the memory or expanding the CPU and all sort of thing? What will be your preferences on that?
Okay, I can sort of take that question. Load balancer is only going to control the number of users hitting your system, but it's not going to help you meet demands, which is more than what you have. It will only help you so that your existing infrastructure is not going to collapse, right? So, but if for a Black Friday, you're only going to be able to manage 100 users and you don't want your infrastructure to scale, maybe have a load balancer and sort of cut it out after 100 users to show them a page saying, okay, you need to keep waiting until one of the 100 users go out of my system. But obviously, if you have your infrastructure or your application which needs to scale up and ensure all your customer demands are met, even if it's 100 users, 10,000 users, or 100,000 users, you need to be able to scale up, which obviously means you need to be able to spend money on your infrastructure, right? I mean, if you know you don't get value out of 10,000 users on your application, cut them out after 100 and say, okay, my capacity, let's say if you have only 100 gift vouchers to give, so you rather accept maybe 150 users and cut people out of it after that. After that, even if you get 100,000 users, maybe you don't have the gift vouchers to give out, right? So again, this is a very lame example, but just trying to correlate it.
Yeah. I think it sort of kind of answered my question, because again, what we are trying to address is the number of user and not because obviously we already have the well-defined, well-structured architecture, which has handled a lot of pressure, and stress as well. But just one day, if we take a look, because again, when it's a peak time, we do not want to scale it in a way which cannot be tested. So the obvious option can be a load balancer, which sort of just, supports the whole system. Yeah, I think thanks a lot for answering the question. I think with that, we are good to close the session. Thanks a lot for sharing all your thoughts, all your insight into FinOps, which I'm sure will be helpful for a lot of people in the test automation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Have a wonderful conference. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So